Hi, I'm Daryl Wilson. I'm a classmate of Professor Greg Evans. I know I look a lot older than he does, but I think that's probably just genetics. I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about my career experience over the last 40 years and reflect back on my time at U of T, where I was a graduate of the chemical engineering class of 1982, which is now surprisingly 40 years ago. I've had the privilege of working across many environmental and sustainable uh, fields. Started my career with DeFasco and Hamilton as first head of safety and then head of health, safety, and environment. Then moved on to Toyota, where I used to make 1,000 cars a day, and learned all kinds of operating discipline from my Japanese friends. Then a short assignment with a enhanced water treatment company, Xenon Environmental in Oakville, and then into the plastics and housing products industry with Royal Group Technologies and PVC. And then finally with Hydrogenics, a Canadian leader in electrolysis and fuel cell technology and hydrogen. For 13 years, the CEO there. And then after trying to retire, I wasn't very good at that and quit after a year. I've taken up this role as the executive director of the Hydrogen Council. So good to be with you. I apologize that I can't be with you in person. I know how much a big difference that makes, so I regret that we can't share this experience together today directly. I'm going to share 5 topics with you really quickly. What I should have learned, and they didn't really teach me when I was in engineering. We used to have a public speaking class, and that's probably as far as we got. A lot has changed, and phenomenal programming is now available to you within the U of T program. I hope this session encourages you to take advantage of what's now available to you and just maybe understand a little bit through my story what a difference it can make. Leadership is where I want to start. Leadership is an art that you learn over time. It's not a matter of being a leader. Anyone can become a leader. In fact, there is a roving course of leadership happening all the time. The official leader isn't always the leader. In fact, leadership is a practice discipline. It's a practice that you can start developing right now. There's all kinds of leadership opportunities in your class with the teams you work with, in the engineering society, throughout the campus, on sports teams, and all the rest of it. But this is a soft skill that's absolutely important to have a sustainable career or work in the field of sustainability. I'm frankly not going to make much about working in sustainability as a field. I know everybody wants to do that today. But as you'll see, some of the things I learned in my career happened in some of the darker places where people don't normally want to go. But learning leadership through the exercise of all the traits that are required of leaders, and developing that trust and inspiring the confidence of the people around you so that they will give you the gift of following you. That's a soft skill that you want to keep an eye on. And then teamwork. I know you work on projects and teams all the time. When I went through university, I had no idea how really the workplace is a continuous exercise in teamwork. The academic environment is actually completely artificial, where you kind of operate as a sole contributor, and hopefully you get good grades. Well, getting just to 80% isn't good enough in industry, and the way you get from 80% to 100% is through a team. Lots of talk about diversity these days, and I don't cast any dispersions on any of that, but frankly, learning to work with others and knowing who they are and knowing who you are is a skill that you're going to want to polish over your entire career. Because really, nothing of significance gets done by individuals working alone. And so teamwork is something that I realized after I left my engineering education was far more important than I ever realized. So yeah, we had a public speaking course. I remember Professor Reeves and the exercise of standing in front of my peers and shaking a little. Today, as communication skills are worked out in the program where you're at, I think you're getting a whole lot more than we got back then, as good a start as that was. Working in companies, in governments, throughout society, depends heavily on you getting your point across. and of course listening to others more than half of the time. But your ability to engage your coworkers and to share your insights is really going to make a difference in your career. In fact, it's probably the biggest differentiator for those who end up doing well in the workplace. So polishing your communication skills now is critically important. I remember a friend of mine was the editor of the school newspaper there at U of T, and he nudged me to enter the public speaking competition as part of the engineering competition. I won that year, and I realized that because of my history and how I grew up, communication skills came somewhat naturally to me. But as I've polished those skills over my entire career, it's been a very, very critical asset. Just this week, I've been speaking in multiple conferences throughout Europe about hydrogen and the opportunity for decarbonization using hydrogen. At 63, it really feels good to be making the difference still that I'm making. And most of that difference making comes through the channel of just communicating well. So something to keep an eye on as well. And then here's one that I don't know if it's part of the program yet at U of T, but I think also really critical and a big gap. In my last assignment as a CEO, I was supported by a wonderful CTO, Joe Cargnelli, also a U of T grad for mechanical engineering. And as I watched Joe operate with customers, he just had a gift for listening, for understanding, and then putting his point across. Yeah, it was communication, but it was something else. Joe grew up around his father's machine shop. That machine shop had all kinds of customers, and Joe watched his dad and his uncle run that shop and grow the business, and realized that customers really are central to all of trade, of business. And the fundamental skill there is selling. When I graduated in 1982, there was a massive recession, the first really big downturn, and I had multiple job offers. Most of them evaporated. 2 of them remained. I went off to Hamilton to work for DeFasco, and 6 weeks later, they told me they were going to lay me off. I'll not be surprised that that's the experience that many of you have in the coming months and years. Don't worry about it. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me. There were no jobs around. Everybody was laying off, but there was a sales job. And I remember interviewing with the guy and having lunch and saying, I don't know if I really want to sell. And at that point, he was going to give me the job, and he said, no, maybe I won't give this guy the job. 3 weeks later, a little more humble, I came back and said, I think I'd really like that job. And I was on the road cold calling, selling hazardous industrial waste services for a company for the next year. And I got to tell you, my ability to act as a leader, to communicate, to run a company as a CEO turns really heavily on a bunch of skills that I learned that year selling on the road. Back in those days, the guys, women lower in the class were the ones who got the sales jobs, and I used to look down on that. But now I realize that commercial skills, commercial savvy is a really big part of business, and something you should never look down on. This last one's a little bit unique for those of you especially who are interested in the whole issue of sustainability. Getting things done in society means working at the interface between the public and the private sector. For most of my career, I've had lots to do with regulation, with environmental instruments that are developed by governments. And I've come to understand that if we're going to change our society for the better, it has to be a very, very strong partnership between the public and private sector. You're probably not getting exposed to how that whole system works, but it's something we're studying. So as you take up your career, pay attention to how your company or the enterprise that you're involved with interfaces with the government and regulation and laws and policy. In fact, connect your work with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And on this point, don't be too fussy where you work. I did my my undergraduate thesis on whiteware slips for toilets with the American Standard Company. I worked for the PVC industry, sometimes called the Satan of resins, the darkest place from an environmental point of view as part of the chlorine cycle. I'm sure many of you don't want to work for the oil and gas industry anymore. Maybe you want to reconsider though some of those judgments. If we're going to get change happening, the oil and gas industry actually, as it transforms itself, has all of the skills and the project management capability to execute on large scale energy projects. And some really positive and phenomenal things are happening. I'm not suggesting you go and work for the worst of the worst. But if I can say it this way, maybe you should reconsider as to whether you should work for the best of the worst. The second worst being, those companies, because they're working in the fossil fuel sector, the sector that's going out of vogue for all kinds of good reasons. There are things that you can learn there, and there are places you can contribute there and maybe transform society in a bigger way than you ever imagined. So be careful about the judgments you make around your next step. Maybe your options are going to be a bit restricted, and maybe you'll end up in a place that doesn't look too green to you. But as a friend of mine said to me when I entered working with the PVC industry, the darker it is, the greener you can make it. So be a difference maker in some of those dark places, and don't fret about what assignment you might get as a first assignment. Here's a last point. I'm thinking about you entering the workplace. I'm thinking back to my situation in 1982 with a big recession. Got married, moved off to Hamilton, had a 16% mortgage, and then got laid off. It sounds like kind of a bad way to start. But I look back on it now, and it taught me a lot of things. And later in my career, I came across this short expression, VUCA. The world and all that's going on is more and more volatile, and that makes us seasick as it goes up and down. And who knows what's going to happen? That uncertainty makes us a little bit anxious. And then there's nothing simple anymore. It's a complicated world, and that causes us confusion. And in the midst of all of this, we feel lost in the ambiguity. There seems to be nothing to hang on to. And the antidote for these things is to have a vision for what you want to be and where you want to go, and keep your eye on the horizon. Disregard all the volatility and ups and downs and stuff that's going on, and just keep your eye on the horizon of growing and being who you're made to be and making a difference. Have a vision. And then as you struggle with all that's going on and the uncertainty, work to understand it. Interact with your peers, the next generation, old guys like me, and work to understand what's going on and learn from all the trouble around you. And that will bring some clarity to all the complexity of what makes up the world, and gradually you'll find your way. And maybe the most important word of all is amid all that sense of lostness and the difficulty of getting going in today's world, the skills of agility, of being able to keep your eyes on the horizon, keep your eyes open, keep very high awareness and presence to what's going on, and then step by step to make the right moves with lots of wisdom. That's agility. And it's a skill that is critical for CEOs. It's a skill that's critical for you as you enter the workplace in the coming months. So I wish you all the best. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you and chat and take your questions, but I hope some of this stuff has been helpful. Thanks very much.